Right.
Hello.
All these last minute details.
Oh,
huh?
I know, the tech stuff, it's always,
Yeah.
how's it gonna work?
Well,
Never smoothly, it's the
you're
thing.
jack of all trades.
Better at some things than others.
No. Well, I think we all can say that.
Yeah, true, true.
Uh,
I'll come up off the live stream and I'll sit back down. I remember Where are they? I might need you to move further up. Okay. We'll see. Shocked if that's the case. There's classes, this is true. This is true. Hi, how are you made it? Good.
I see it.
You were wondering, thinking you might not, were you? At one point?
Well, I didn't go to college.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I can share some things.
Bacon too.
Oh, good, good.
Yeah.
Hey. Oh, sorry, excuse me. Hi, how are you doing?
You do?
Good, good to see you.
Hi.
Mark, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Yeah,
Me too.
good. Good.
What do you hear from home?
I just talked to Julie before I came.
Oh, is she doing
She's
okay?
moving to Ecuador.
She is.
Hopefully for Saturday.
Okay.
So I saved some seed. But, the same, all the pain, yeah, yeah. But she just decided, you know, it's too much.
My good friends Ike and Judy DeGraff, did you know them?
What?
Ike and Judy DeGraff?
The name's familiar, but I can't.
Both fell recently, so children said it's time. So they're moving to Appledore.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Comes the time when
It
we
is,
have to
yeah.
make changes.
Yeah.
But I'm not glad I didn't.
No, no, no.
Joel and Angie Brewster.
Oh, yeah, they're the best.
They're good friends.
Oh,
of
they
ours.
are. Are they on our site right now? Are
They're back.
They're back.
They're
Oh,
just back.
okay.
They're just back.
Okay. Oh, okay. Do you go to church with them?
Well, when they still live in Zealand, but when my husband was pastor,
How are you doing?
Back, huh?
Yes, we're back.
They-
We're driving for her.
Oh, okay.
they always stayed friends ever since.
Oh, okay.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Oh, my goodness.
Last week.
Okay, well, I'll check. Thanks, sister.
Oh, good. Great.
Got two more for, Bruce. for the higher chairs.
Jackie, what is my rule about wearing a mask? Or
You can take it off when you get up there to speak, that's fine, and
But
then,
instead of
I'd be easier
non-mask,
to do online to
Yes.
lips a little bit.
yes,
Okay.
for sure.
I don't know if I have to be.
Yes, I know. They'll ask you to take it off.
You better.
Yeah,
She'll get on you.
yeah, that's a hard part of all this.
What's that?
Are you used to it now?
Oh,
Yeah,
well, that's
yeah.
all right, I guess. What I plan doing, it's not gonna be, you don't have to forgive me for doing what I do. I'm gonna do good work.
There you go.
I was created for
So
that.
where is your office, are you working at home now, or?
I am working
I
at
don't
home.
know what you were thinking.
My office is on the corner of Tuesday.
Okay, yep.
So, my church is
Yeah.
And you're,
okay.
yeah.
And,
Yeah.
yeah, we just.
The older you
bought
get,
new
the more
building for World
crazy you get.
Oh, good, that's where nice, where at?
You still going to the
Byron
pool with your
Commerce.
wife every
That
night?
is the road that swings like by Culver's.
No, I haven't
Yep.
for a while
Yep.
and stuff like that.
Back
I
around the
had a 2
lumbermen.
week
Yeah.
layoff because I have to
Yeah.
get
Okay.
stitches out
They moved
of
the courthouse.
Okay,
I had
great.
a mold procedure on my leg.
Yeah,
Some skin cancer.
I've gone there a couple times, but they're always closed.
okay, I know there's on the corner there, there's
Get them out
that,
next Wednesday, so then I'll go
go-kart.
back in.
Oh, yeah,
Place.
yeah.
Yeah, I thought
Yeah.
about midnight,
Yeah.
but you know,
So just wind
really,
down
it's
there.
too
Yeah.
late for us.
Okay.
I figured about 10 o'clock
okay, I
at
have
night.
not gone back in
Then it's
there.
good time for
There's a lot of, it's a new building, and, we bought that, and then.
You know, I like to follow the rules, you know, it said it's open till 10, you know. Open pool, if you look at the program, it says from 5:30 in the morning.
Yeah,
to
my
about
brother
10 p.m.
graduated
I
from
think
Wright
you
Center
have
back in.
to, right on the top third. So you can't go
The
after,
difference between
after 10.
then, and today, it's always what I'm
Like
like,
security
like,
guards
like,
and
when
stuff like
you're
that.
on trees. Yeah.
You can't check in.
Yeah.
Of course, I wouldn't check in anyway.
People are sad about it, some people
Yeah.
are excited.
Yeah, I'm on the excited.
Yes, I do,
Yeah,
Jack.
I like it, yeah.
I do, it's very nice.
Except it's so far on the other end.
Yeah, it is a long ways away from us, yeah.
I know.
Well,
That's what I said when I moved here. Oh,
Oh, we're gonna move that way, maybe I'll move that.
Yeah, sure.
I had to bring our cart back, the car in the garage, and
Almost, I
that's
think
way,
it's one of
way
the
in
more
here.
expensive areas right now.
There, and then cut back this way, you know, and came in that door. Yeah, it is a little ways away from
Interesting
everything.
out there.
It's all right. We got good view.
Unless you go downstairs without your key.
Right.
I done-
I've done that.
I didn't have it in my purse, so I just. No, I had my key, but I didn't have my purse, that's what. So is this your daughter?
Good, yeah.
In the program?
She had some, been gone or just back a couple days, so she had some errands to run that I don't see done here. She's
Good afternoon.
Good
afternoon.
Let's turn it on.
It helps.
That helps, yep. All right, good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep, okay. We are so fortunate to have with us today Ms. Carol Bremer-Bennett. Did I say that correctly? All right, she is the Executive Director for World Renew, and she's going to be talking on our topic, Don't Be the Final Aftershock, disaster response that helps without hurting. Welcome, Carol. Come on up.
Greetings. Thank you for having me. My mother is in the audience today, so that's exciting to have my mom, Jackie Bremer, here. I come from a multitude of heritages, like many of you probably do, and one of them is my Navajo background. And so in Navajo, I greet you, Yat A. Carol Bremer-Bennett, Yinishe, Tonlini Nishle, Totachini, Asischin. And I introduce my name. And then my clans, my maternal clan is the Water Flows Together people, and my paternal clan is the Bitterwater people. So I greet you. I used to serve as the director of Rehoboth Christian School. We have some good Rehoboth people who just came in to the Alliance. Thank you. There might be more out there that I don't see. And so I welcome you to this time. I want to acknowledge that I'm not on the Deneta, the land of the Navajo today, but that we're on the land of the Three Fires Council people. And the Three Fires Council are made up of the Ottawa, the Potawatomi, and the, I'm going to forget, Peoria people. And so we recognize that land, and we honor those who have held and stewarded that land over time, who are still present in our community here today, even though we might not notice or see their visibility. So I thank you and them for honoring that. I am currently serving as the Director of World Renew. If you'd like to learn more about World Renew, I did bring some things I quick grabbed from the office and brought that over there. It doesn't look as nice as my people who go to conferences display it all pretty, so don't tell them that I kind of just quickly spread it out there on the table. But if you're interested in anything, I've got some various items, and I'll be around to answer questions also after. World Renew is started 60 years ago. This is our 60th anniversary as a ministry of the Christian Reformed Church. It was started in a basement, maybe it looked kind of like this room, of a Christian Reformed church in West Michigan, when deacons were wrestling with how can we best respond to these crises and disasters around the world, and not have to figure out how to actually do it ourselves every time. Certainly there must be people who are more experts in this field of responding to disasters, and certainly our church isn't the only church who wants to help respond when a crisis hits. Maybe we could band together as multiple deacon groups and work together to do this in a better way. And so the Christian Reformed World Relief Committee, CRWRC, was formed as a committee of deacons to figure out how to do that, to bring relief. And over the years, World Renew developed and changed and grew. And so now, in 2012, changed our name to fit better who we are, but also make our pathways into certain countries more accessible. Also to recognize that we no longer just have Christian Reformed churches who support our work. In fact, we have about 72 different denominations that volunteer and support our work in different ways. And we have a massive system of networks and alliances that we're part of around the world. World Renew has basically 3 areas of work. We work in community development to help alleviate hunger and poverty around the world, and so we take a long-term look at how we can help do that. We try to go to some of the areas that are the poorest areas and the most remote areas of the world. And we respond in disasters and crises. And then the third area that ties those areas together is we're always thinking about how are we called to do that as we want to do that in a way that promotes justice. Because a lot of the, and I'll talk a little bit about a lot of both the hunger and the poverty that's experienced in the world, as well as the impact of disasters, roots into some of the injustices that also happen around the world. And we do that as a faith-based organization. And so we are rooted in Scripture. Because we came from the Christian Reformed Church, we're rooted in our Reformed theology. And so we seek to serve and to show Christ's compassion to people in that lens. So that's what we do. I can answer questions about anything later, so you can certainly ask me any questions. I'm a former educator, so I love active and engaging questions, and so nothing's off limits. But what I wanted to talk to you today about was this idea of don't be the next Aftershock. How do you respond in a disaster without hurting? And I think a lot of you may have heard of some books I'm going to reference in this presentation. But the truth is that there are ways when a crisis hits, there are ways you can respond that truly help, and there are ways that you can respond that are meant to help, but actually they're not as helpful. And in fact, in worst case scenarios, they actually can be harmful. And so what we've learned as World Renew is to really take a good look at that and to measure and to plan our responses accordingly. So let me take an example here. This is an earthquake. It's one of the more recent, larger, maybe heard about crises. And this is the earthquake that happened in August last year in Haiti. And so we often in the United States hear about crises that happen in Haiti. And so I thought that might be a good example. So this was the earthquake that hit, and you can kind of see there, this is one of our maps of where the earthquake hits, just to get the idea. Now, if some of you recall, this earthquake came, and it came after an assassination of the president of Haiti, which happened in July, and it came right before a tropical storm named Grace hit. And so there were hurricanes and tropical storms and earthquakes and political upheaval all happening to Haiti at the same time. And so, of course, it's quite devastating. And we have a long-term presence in Haiti. When we look at disaster response in World Renew, we have to consider, who are we called to be and where are we best suited? In our disaster response work, we respond to tornadoes and fires and earthquakes and hurricanes and cyclones and flooding. And we do that throughout the United States and Canada as well as around the world. And when we do that, we want to make sure that we're thinking about, well, who are we really? We're not the American Red Cross, where we're coming in even as the storm is going on sometimes, or the first responders, and are driving around in boats and rescuing people off of their roofs, or lifting up those heavy pieces of cement and trying to find survivors. We aren't that. We're not even often in the first short term, the days or the weeks after a disaster. We're in that green area in the long-term response, in the months and the years. And so there are disasters that we're responding to today that you have long since forgotten about. Just last month, we wrapped up our last work in Nepal in the earthquake that hit there in 2015. So that's the kind of response that we do. When we go into an area, we stay for that long-term recovery. And during that time, we often find that maybe there's other issues that we have expertise in that we can also lend a hand in. And sometimes it results in us establishing an office. And we were very close to establishing an office and a long-term presence in Nepal. But the pandemic hit, and we had to be careful about how what we could sustain and how we could add new programs and staff in the last couple of years. So we didn't do that, but that's a long time, how long we often stay in an area. So the other thing that we consider when we respond to a disaster is where should we go? Disasters and crises are hitting all over the place, and how do we determine where to go? So we look at the resources we have as far as staff and proximity, but we also look at the hunger and the poverty of the area, and what resources are or are not going to be available in an area. And so Haiti is a place where there's chronic food insecurity, which means that people don't have a reliable daily intake of food. It can swing wildly where there can be food some days and not other days. There can be just one meal a day. There can be a lack of nutrition. Even if there's a couple of meals a day, there can be not enough nutrition to really support good brain development. We're very, very active in making sure, especially that children get the proper nutrition so that their brains can develop and that they can really become the full person that God intended them to be.
What's
So-
an IPC?
An IPC is, I don't know what an IPC is.
IPC.
IPC.
I think that's a type of report, actually. Good question, but I don't actually know what the IPC is. I was looking more at the map when I pulled that. I'll find out. So, what I want to talk about a little bit is how then do you go? I gave you some parameters about how we might choose where we go, but at World Renew, we know that how we work also makes a difference. It's not just the reason why and what we're compelled by in our faith and our deciding to show compassion. It's not just the where or the who, but it's the how that we spend quite a bit of time and effort on. And I think it's important for people to realize that it makes a difference. If you're interested in reading further, a couple of books that are very guiding to World Renew's work are these two books, the When Helping Hurts book and Walking with the Poor. And I want to show you a model from the Walking with the Poor book in just a moment. We recognize that if poverty and even injustice were a matter of lack of stuff, we could have solved it. We know that we have enough stuff, and enough stuff has been given around the world that we could have solved it. But it really doesn't come down to that. It comes down to some other key factors that we have to work on and address. And so some of you who keep up on news might have possibly noticed last week World Renew sent out a press release that we just purchased a new building and that we're relocating. Ever since Hurricane Katrina, World Renew has been in two places here in Grand Rapids. In Byron Center, where we had a warehouse, and at the corner of 28th Street and Kalamazoo, where we have office space. And we just got to the size where we couldn't all fit in the office space that was at 28th Street and Kalamazoo. And so we purchased a new building, and we're going to be able to all be in that same space together as part of our growth for the 60th anniversary. And yet, even though we have a warehouse, what is in that warehouse sometimes surprises people. It's not stuff that we give away. It's vans and trailers and tractors and chainsaws and drills and hammers and nails and bedding and mattresses for our volunteers who go to help. But it's not stuff that we give away. And so it's a very interesting model to think about. When people have a disaster that hits them, we often think, well, if they just had their stuff back, then they'd be okay again. And so certainly we concentrate on making sure that people have shelter and food and water, but we don't give away a lot of stuff from our warehouse here in Grand Rapids. And I'll talk about why that is in just a minute. So if we look at the book Walking with the Poor, this is an interesting model that World Renew recognizes and that we have found truth in. We believe that God created everyone in His image, and that everyone is to have this flourishing, and all people are called to flourish and to be in right connection. We also believe that things have happened and that there's a brokenness in those connections, and that if we really want to have the truest impact in our work, that we need to address all of these areas, 4 key areas where relationships have been broken so that we can restore people. So one relationship is to God, and that relationship where people know God is important. One relationship is to other people, and we want to work on how can we bring communities together, because there's such a power in communities working together to change their situation rather than individuals trying to do it on their own. One of it is our connection to creation. We work a lot with farmers around the world because oftentimes people who are living in the greatest poverty and struggling are in rural communities, and they are what we would call subsistence farmers, where they're growing not even quite enough to get their own family by. And so we work a lot with farmers around the world in order to help them understand how they can work with what God's provided them, even in the midst of drought and flood and some of the experiences that we've got with how the rainfall is changing around the world, that we can see how they can work with those things using new techniques and methods in order to produce an even greater harvest and a more diverse harvest to feed their children better protein, and so they can have better nutrition. And then we also have people look at their relationship with themselves. Because just like in any society, there are things that are told to people that are lies about who they truly are, what their value and worth really is, what will help them or not, and where they should invest their money or how they should spend their time. And so we work with people to really work on knowing who they are and mending that relationship with themselves. And one of these options, just doing one, doesn't work. We come at this with a very holistic approach, saying we've got to work on all of these things together if we want to have transformative change in a community. Some of you have heard this saying, and it's give a man a fish and you feed him for a day, teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. And I think a lot of you, we believe that. It's like, well, that makes sense. You know, that's what we want for people. Isn't that what God wants for people? Isn't that part of how God wants us to flourish and to develop? And in the Navajo culture, we have a beautiful thing called a laughing ceremony. When a baby is young and laughs out loud for the first time, that baby throws a big party, and the family throws a big party on behalf of the baby. And one of the things the baby does is give away little chunks of rock salt, which back in the day were very valuable for preserving your food supply and your food source. And so the baby gives away this rock salt to every person. And it's a sign of a number of things. Some people say it's a sign of, not having too much tears and the salty tears. But one of the signs it is that this baby will be healthy and have enough to always be able to share what that person has. They'll have an abundance. And so there's that sharing component. And certainly that's what we want. I think that's what this proverb tries to capture as well, is that you'll have not just enough for a day, but you'll have enough for a lifetime, and you might even have enough to share with those who are less fortunate. What World Renew has done is taken this quote and thought, now what about, you can teach, we actually find the farmers already know how to farm, wherever you go in the world, even if you were a farmer, and I work with farmers pretty regularly in the United States. They go and travel to other places in the world, and they're learning things about farming, and they're like, wow, those farmers are better than I, given the circumstances that they have. The fact that they can farm on that land is pretty amazing. The fishermen already know how to fish. It's not that we're coming to teach those things, because really what's happening is that there's no access to where the fish actually are. There's a gate. There's a barrier to even get to the pond. And so, yes, we could go back here and we could teach people how to fish, but if what they get and they reach is a gate that says there's no entrance, then what good is the skill of knowing how to fish? And we find that people are, if they do have access, what they have access to is often not of good quality or even safe. What if where they're trying to fish is contaminated? And so even in learning that, I should feed my child some protein along with that rice because that helps with that brain development and fights against stunting. What if the fish you're feeding them is not safe fish because it's coming from contaminated, polluted water? And what if the fisherman is not a fisherman at all? I just signed off on a letter that's going to go out to our donors in a few weeks, and it talks about how 60% of the farmers around the world are women that we're working with. And we don't typically think about women as being farmers. When we say farmer, and I said that a minute ago, a certain image comes to mind. And when we say fishermen, we've already said fishermen. But what if in a culture you have a widow who also needs to fish to feed her children and her family, and yet she's not allowed to? We have a lot of our work in places like Laos and Tanzania, where we're working to help widows be able to have land rights so that when their husband passes away, they don't lose everything. And so we're working with communities to change laws so that women can also be landholders. I'm sorry for the blurriness of this photo. It's not a World Renew photo, so I had to grab it off the internet. But let's talk about, my topic is about how then in disaster response can we make sure that we're not a shock, another aftershock after an earthquake hits. So let's go back to Haiti. In Haiti, that earthquake hits, and a lot of times people who want to help try to figure out, well, I want to help, they had an earthquake, they must have lost all their stuff, so let me send some stuff. And one of the favorite things to send to Haiti is backpacks for children. So here's children with a whole bunch of backpacks. I don't know whose backpacks they are. I'm pretty sure they don't say World Renew on them because we don't give out backpacks. But what happens when you respond and you want to help, and you're doing this out of the good intentions of your heart, you probably even not just give a child a backpack, but there might be a t-shirt in there, there might be some soap, maybe there's a pen and a notebook for school. Maybe there's, some people like to put toothbrushes or socks in there as well. Maybe even a pair of shoes if you're fortunate enough to know the size of a shoe that somebody might want to wear. And so you put those things in there. And it seems like, well, that's going to help because they lost their stuff, so what they need is stuff. In most disasters, that's actually not what people need. What they need is a livelihood. They need their dignity to be restored. They need to be put back into their proper place for adults as the parents and the providers for their family and children. World Renew has done quite a bit of theological work on the role of family and the role of parents, and how we believe that that's a God-ordained unit, and that we believe that there are roles for people to play, and that when we come in as an outsider and try to play the role of parent for people who themselves should be parents, that we are decreasing their dignity, that we are displacing them really from who God wants them to be and who we should want them to be. And then when we leave, we've kind of messed up the whole thing. And so when you think about how to respond in a disaster, I want to challenge you to think about, now if I give this backpack, let's say, I wonder how many people in Haiti had been employed to make backpacks. And if all of a sudden they're flooded with all these free backpacks, I wonder how they'll have their livelihood back. And this is what happens. This is what happens to Haiti and to other countries over and over again. I've got you thinking, this is a great book to read. It's called From Aid to Trade, and World Renew is actually featured in this book as an outstanding model. Because what happens when an earthquake hits Haiti is all this free stuff floods the market. And I don't know how many of you were involved in businesses, but you can't compete against free. You can't keep your business open and your family fed trying to sell something and make something when everybody else is, shipping it in and getting it free. And this can be clothing, it can be backpacks, it can be even food. And so what World Renew does is we try to purchase 90% of anything we deem that we should give away and needs to be given away. Maybe it's clean water, maybe it's tarps, maybe it's food and grain and rice, maybe it is school supplies. But we purchase it, 90% of it, on the local market. Because even though in that first slide I showed you where Haiti was hit with the earthquake, the reality is the rest of that island, including the Dominican Republic, was not hit by the earthquake in the same way. And that all the tarps that we needed to quickly shelter people who were going to get hit by the tropical storm Grace right after the earthquake hit, we found all of the tarps that we needed to purchase in Haiti and got them to Haitians. And so not only did we help preserve and shelter people who needed shelter, but we helped Haiti, the Haitian business owners who were selling tarps, to keep in business. And so what happens in a disaster oftentimes is that the recovery is delayed because so much of this free stuff pops up over there. So it's a different way to think about responding to a disaster. We do this in North America as well. We are rebuilding homes in Texas, in Louisiana, in Puerto Rico, I think we're doing some now maybe in Colorado because of the wildfires. And we won't ship any lumber or supplies or any of that stuff from Michigan over to there. We'll send our workers there and they'll purchase everything on the local market there because they've just gone through a crisis and they need to have their economy revived and people need to stay working in order to truly recover. And so we use that same philosophy both in the United States and around the world. It's challenging, it can be a little bit harder to do, but it's also quicker because a lot of things can get stuck at customs and held up on boats. And maybe you've even experienced some of this news of even our own supply chain in the United States recently, right? You hear these stories of all these containers in Los Angeles that aren't going anywhere. Well, that happens when you're trying to import things, especially if they're gifted. There's high suspicion, and it can cost more to ship things over and then try to give them away than to actually purchase them on the local market. So you've got that problem as well. And then you have the timing delays where when you're responding, your stuff is stuck somewhere. You've put all your money into that container that's stuck, and somebody wants a bribe or something to get it out of customs. And meanwhile, the people need the tarps right away or need the food right away. And so that's the kind of work that World Renew does. So those are ways that we can make sure that when we respond to a disaster, we're helping and we're helping and we're helping. It kind of triples the effect of what we do, and that we're not being an aftershock. So if you're curious about that, you can read about Aid to Trade and the chapters that World Renew is featured in there. We do all of this. All of this philosophy comes from ABCD. It's something that a lot of churches have decided to learn about and community organizations have learned about. And it's an approach of looking at the assets of a community and then building on that, just like these building blocks show here. Asset-based community development and asset-based disaster response looks at, well, let's take a look at what's already in the community and let's build from there without trying to supplement or bring too much in from the outside. Because once you start to bring in things from the outside, you can create dependencies. And you can build a lot of things that can't be fixed because all the parts came from somewhere else. And so there's a lot of places, a lot of organizations who have tried to do good things with building wells and having fancy technology that can help. But if the people themselves